The night was colder than usual. Snow fell from a dark sky, covering the ground in a white blanket that seemed endless. The wind howled through the broken trees like a warning, sharp and cruel, making even the strongest soldier shiver inside his coat. Private Daniel Hayes stood guard outside the base. His boots were deep in the snow, his rifle heavy in his hands. He hated nights like this. Everything was silent, too silent. Even the animals seemed to have vanished from the forest. Only the wind moved, carrying strange sounds that made him think of ghosts. Daniel pulled his coat tighter. He breathed into his hands, trying to fight the cold. The base lights behind him glowed weakly, like small candles in the storm. Far ahead, the forest stretched into shadows. It was hard to see anything through the falling snow. Still, Daniel felt something was out there. His instincts whispered to him. Years of training told him to trust those whispers. Something was watching. Something was moving. He lifted his rifle and listened. At first only the wind. Then a sound, soft, weak, almost lost in the snow. "Please," Daniel froze. His breath caught in his throat. He looked around, his eyes sharp, searching. "Warm meal." The words were broken like someone who barely knew English. The voice was not human. Daniel's heart began to pound. He gripped his rifle tighter. His orders were clear. If you see one of them, you shoot. No mercy, no questions. But the sound came again. This time he saw movement. Two figures, small and thin, slowly stepped out of the trees. They looked like shadows at first, but as they came closer, the guard lights caught them. Daniel's eyes widened. It was an alien. A woman, tall but weak, her skin pale blue and covered in frost. Her clothes were torn, nothing more than scraps that barely covered her body. Her feet were bare, red from the snow. She was shivering badly, her arms wrapped around a smaller figure. A child. The little one looked no older than 7 in human years. She clung to her mother's side, her small body trembling. Her eyes, large and bright, looked straight at Daniel with fear and hunger. Daniel raised his rifle, his finger on the trigger. His breath was sharp, his training screaming in his head. "Stop! Don't move!" he shouted, his voice cutting through the storm. The alien mother stopped. She raised her free hand, palm open, showing she carried no weapon. Her voice cracked, weak but clear. "Please. Not fight? We just want..." "Warm meal?" Daniel blinked. He could not believe what he was hearing. The child looked up at him. Her lips were blue. Her tiny hands clutched her mother's arm. She whispered something in her own language, a sound full of fear. The mother lowered herself to her knees in the snow, still holding her child close. She looked desperate, broken. Daniel's hands shook on the rifle. His orders screamed in his mind, "They are dangerous. They are enemies. Do not trust them." But in front of him, he saw no soldiers, no invaders. He saw a mother and daughter freezing, starving, and begging for mercy. The mother spoke again, her words slow and heavy. No war. No harm. We only live." Daniel felt his throat tighten. The snow fell harder, covering their thin bodies like a cruel blanket. They were shaking so badly he thought they might collapse at any moment. For a long moment, no one moved. The storm filled the silence, wrapping the 3 of them in cold and fear. Daniel lowered his rifle just a little. He looked at the child, her eyes wide, shining with tears. A thought hit him like a punch. What if this was my child? What if it was my family out here barefoot and freezing? The soldier's heart beat faster. His mind raced. He knew what his commander would say. Shoot them now. End it before it's too late. But his gut told him something different. These 2 were not enemies. They were survivors. Still, he could not be sure. Was this a trick? Were others hiding in the trees, waiting for him to lower his guard? Daniel took one step closer. The alien mother flinched, pulling her daughter tighter, as if ready to shield her with her own body. He stopped. He lowered his rifle a little more. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice softer now. The mother's lips trembled. She looked at him with pleading eyes. "Mother," she said, placing her hand on her chest. Then she touched the small girl's shoulder. "Daughter." Daniel's chest ached. The words were simple, but they carried so much weight. The child whispered again, her small voice breaking in the cold. Daniel swallowed hard. The storm roared around them. His finger slowly moved away from the trigger. He was standing at a line. One step meant obeying orders, the other meant betraying them. The night grew darker, the cold sharper, and Daniel knew this choice would change everything. The storm pressed harder against the world, snow falling like endless shards of ice. Daniel stood frozen in place, staring at the two figures in front of him. His rifle was still heavy in his hands, but his arms trembled. The alien mother did not rise. She stayed on her knees in the snow, her body shaking as she held her daughter close. The child's lips were cracked, her breath shallow and weak. Their bare feet were buried in white frost as if the earth itself was trying to claim them. The mother lifted her head, her eyes glowing faintly in the guard lights. There was no anger in them, no hatred, only fear, and something else. A quiet strength that made Daniel pause. "Please," she whispered again, her voice breaking. The words strained as if each one cost her pain. "No fight. No hurt. We only want live." Daniel swallowed, his throat dry. His training screamed inside his skull. "They are enemies. They will trick you. They killed humans before. Do not listen." But his eyes saw only a mother's plea. A desperate woman with nothing left but her child. He lowered his rifle just enough to breathe again. "Why are you here?" he asked. His voice came out harsher than he meant. The alien mother blinked at him, searching for the right words. Her speech was broken, halting, like someone learning a new language while drowning in fear. "Ship, fall," she said, tapping her chest weakly. "Sky, fire, many, gone." Her voice cracked, but she pushed on. "We hide, we run. Soldiers kill, we only have each other." Her hand tightened around her daughter's thin arm. The child coughed, a dry sound that made Daniel's stomach twist. The soldier's eyes narrowed. A crash, survivors, hunted. That was not the story he had been told. Commander said the aliens had come to conquer, to steal, to destroy. But this mother spoke of running, of hiding, of loss. He clenched his jaw. "If this is true, why ask me? Why not run farther? Why come here?" The alien mother bent her head, pressing it against her daughter's. She breathed slowly, as if gathering courage. Then she looked at Daniel again, her face wet with melting snow. "Because, child, dying," she whispered. "No food, no fire, no hope, only cold." The words hit Daniel like a hammer. His chest tightened until he could hardly breathe. He glanced at the girl. Her hands trembled as she tried to cover her face from the snow. Her body was so small, so fragile. The mother's voice broke into raw honesty. "I beg, one meal. Just warm, then we go. You never see us again." The wind howled between them, carrying the sound of her plea into the night. Daniel's heart thundered. He could almost hear the voice of his commander in his head. "They are liars. They are dangerous. If you give them food, tomorrow they will ask for blood." But another voice rose in him, louder, sharper. "She is a mother. That is a child. Would you let them freeze? Would you let them starve?" Daniel's grip on the rifle loosened. His finger left the trigger. Still, his eyes scanned the trees, searching for movement. What if others were watching, waiting to attack the moment he lowered his guard? He stepped closer, boots crunching in the snow. The mother flinched, curling around her daughter like a shield. Her arms spread wide, thin and trembling, but firm in purpose. If he raised the rifle again, she was ready to take the bullet first. Daniel stopped. His breath came out in white clouds. "I don't know if I can trust you," he said, his voice low. The mother's lips trembled, her body shaking harder. She touched her chest again, then pointed to her daughter. "Mother, daughter," she repeated softly. Then she pressed her forehead to the child's head. "All I have." The girl looked up at Daniel then, her eyes wide and shining, full of silent pleading. Not with words, not with tricks, just the raw, wordless cry of a starving child. Daniel felt his throat burn. His hands shook so badly he almost dropped his weapon. The storm screamed around them as if the earth itself was waiting for his answer. Finally, he lowered the rifle completely. The metal touched the snow at his side. The alien mother gasped softly, as if she had not dared to hope. She pressed her daughter tighter, whispering quick words in her own language. The child clung to her, eyes never leaving the soldier. Daniel pulled off one glove, reaching into his coat. His fingers brushed against a ration bar, a small hard pack of food meant to keep soldiers alive in the field. He stared at it. One meal for him, or life for them. His hand tightened around it. He thought of the weeks of lies, the endless orders, the way command painted the enemy as monsters. But here was no monster. Here was a mother begging for her child. Daniel knelt slowly in the snow, the bar in his hand. The mother's eyes widened, glowing faintly in the cold light. He placed the food on the ground between them. "Take it," he said. The mother hesitated, her body tense, as if afraid it was a trick. But the child's hunger was stronger. The little girl reached out, grabbed the ration, and bit into it with shaking hands. Tears rolled down her face as she chewed. The mother bowed her head low, so low her forehead touched the snow. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice shaking. "Thank you, human." Daniel stared at them, his chest heavy. He knew what he had just done. He had broken orders. He had chosen mercy. And in that moment, as the storm swallowed the world, Daniel also knew something else. This choice would not end tonight. The little girl ate as if every bite was her last. The ration bar was small and hard, but in her hands it was a treasure. Crumbs stuck to her lips as she chewed, tears sliding down her face. The sound of her small voice, half sobs, half relief, was almost too much for Daniel to bear. The mother did not eat. She held her daughter close, watching her carefully, her own lips trembling as if the smell of food alone was painful. Daniel noticed her eyes. They were fixed on the child with such love that it was impossible to mistake her for a threat. She had given up everything for her daughter, but her body shook badly. Her skin had gone a dull, sickly shade under the glow of the lights. She was starving too, Daniel realized. More than starving, she was near collapse. Yet when the ration bar broke in half and the child offered her a piece with tiny shaking fingers, the mother shook her head. "No," she whispered. "For you. All for you." The girl pressed the food into her mother's hand anyway. Daniel saw the conflict in the woman's eyes. Pride fought against need. Then slowly, with shaking fingers, she took a tiny bite, just enough to keep herself upright. The sight tore at him. Daniel looked back toward the base. The guard tower loomed behind him, its faint light barely cutting through the storm. Inside, soldiers were drinking hot coffee, laughing, talking, safe from the freezing air. If they knew what he was doing, they would brand him a traitor, and yet he did not move. The girl finished her share quickly. She wiped her lips with her arm and clung to her mother again, whispering in her alien tongue. Daniel did not know the words, but he understood the meaning. Gratitude, relief, safety, if only for this moment. The mother lifted her head slowly, her glowing eyes fixed on him. She bowed low, her forehead nearly in the snow. "You kind," she said in broken English. "Not all. Monsters," Daniel's chest tightened. Monsters. That was what Command called them. Monsters who came to destroy, who deserved no mercy. But in her eyes, humans were the monsters. Hunters who chased the survivors through forests and frozen wastelands. And standing here, he could not deny it. He cleared his throat, trying to keep his voice steady. "You can't stay out here. The patrols, they'll find you, and if they do..." He did not finish. The mother understood anyway. She pressed her daughter closer, nodding slowly, her eyes full of fear. Daniel looked around the trees. The storm was heavy, the snow piling high. Their tracks would be easy to follow. If another guard came this way, it would be over. "You need shelter," he said. The mother blinked at him, confusion on her face. Then she gave a weak shake of her head. "No. Safe. Nowhere." Her voice cracked on the last word. Daniel cursed under his breath. He knew she was right. Anywhere near the base, they would be hunted. And yet he couldn't send them back into the forest to freeze. The child coughed suddenly, a rough, painful sound that made the mother flinch. She rubbed the girl's back, whispering softly in her own tongue. But the cough kept coming. Daniel stepped closer without thinking. "She's sick," he said quietly. The mother nodded, her face pale with worry. "Cold. Too long cold." Daniel hesitated, the storm howling in his ears. His training told him to call the other guards to report what he had found. His heart told him something else. If he left them here, the girl would not survive another night. He looked down at the two figures in the snow, the starving child, the trembling mother. They were fragile, broken, but still clinging to life, still fighting to stay together. Slowly, Daniel made a choice. "Follow me," he said, his voice low. The mother tensed, her arms wrapped tighter around her daughter. Her glowing eyes narrowed in fear. "Trap?" she whispered. Daniel shook his head. "No trap, shelter, warmth, just trust me." The words felt strange on his tongue. He had never spoken to one of them like this before. Never thought he would. For a long moment, the mother did not move. Snow piled on her shoulders, her breath ragged. Then at last she nodded. She stood on shaking legs, lifting her daughter into her arms. The girl's head rested on her shoulder, too weak to walk. Daniel turned, scanning the trees once more before motioning for them to follow. He led them away from the guard path into the deeper shadows of the forest, where the storm covered their tracks. Every step felt like a betrayal. Every step closer to the base felt like a rope tightening around his neck. But he kept walking, the sound of the mother's soft footsteps behind him, the child's faint cough breaking the silence. Finally, they reached an old supply shed, half buried in snow. It had been abandoned months ago, left to rot in the cold. Daniel pushed the door open, snow spilling inside. The air was musty, but it was dry. It was shelter. Inside? He whispered. The mother stepped in cautiously, her eyes darting around the dark space. She set her daughter down on a pile of old tarps, wrapping the child in whatever scrap she could find. Daniel watched, his breath heavy. He pulled another ration from his coat, placing it quietly on the floor. The mother looked at it, then at him. She bowed her head deeply once more. "You risk," she said softly. "Why?" Daniel's mouth was dry. He didn't know how to explain it, not in words. So he only said, "Because no child should beg for food in the snow." The mother's eyes shone in the dark, and for a moment the shed was filled with silence. Not fear, not suspicion, but something close to hope, and yet Daniel knew the danger had only just begun. The shed was dark and smelled of rust and old wood. Snow tapped softly on the roof, the storm outside still fierce. Daniel stood near the door, his rifle leaning against the wall while the alien mother sat on the floor with her daughter curled in her lap. The child had fallen asleep at last, her breathing shallow but steady. For a while, no one spoke. The only sound was the wind and the faint crack of frozen wood shifting in the cold. Daniel's mind was heavy. He knew he had crossed a line. If anyone found out what he was doing, he would be court-martialed, maybe even shot. Yet, as he looked at the girl, her small chest rising and falling against her mother's arms, he felt no regret. The mother's glowing eyes studied him in the shadows. She seemed to be weighing him, testing him in silence. Finally, she spoke. Her voice was quiet, her words halting, but each one carried weight. "You, soldier," she said. Daniel nodded slowly. "Yes," her gaze sharpened. "You're soldiers. Hunt us, kill us." Why? The question hit Daniel hard. He opened his mouth but found no answer. The truth was he didn't know. His commanders told him the aliens were invaders. They said the war was necessary. But now, staring at a barefoot mother holding her starving child, those words felt like ashes in his mouth. He shook his head. "That's what they told us. That you came to conquer, that you wanted our planet." The mother let out a sound, half laugh, half sob. "Conquer? We came to be broken. Ship dying. Home gone. We seek only peace." Daniel frowned. "Gone? Your home?" Her eyes dimmed, shadows of grief crossing her face. She looked down at her daughter, brushing a hand across the girl's forehead. When she spoke again, her voice was heavy with sorrow. "Our world, burned. Skyfire, poison, no food. No life, we flee as stars. Far, far. Only small ships. Not enough." She paused, her breath shaking. "We come here, not to fight. To beg." Daniel stared at her, his chest tight. The words painted a picture he had never imagined. A whole species scattered across the stars, not as conquerors, but as refugees. Running, starving, searching for safety. "And what did you find?" he asked quietly, though he already feared the answer. The mother's face twisted with pain. "Guns fear death, humans see us, monsters. But we only mothers, fathers, children." She pressed her lips to her daughter's hair. "We only want live." Daniel's jaw clenched. His thoughts raced back to his training, to the endless drills, to the speeches of commanders who described the aliens as threats, killers, demons. He remembered the posters plastered on base walls. Protect humanity. Destroy the invaders. Now he realized how easily lies could be dressed as truth. He sank onto an old crate, running a hand through his hair. The weight of his rifle across the room suddenly felt like guilt pressed into metal. The mother watched him closely. Her voice softened. "Why help us?" "You risk death." Daniel looked at her for a long moment. Finally, he said, "Because when I look at you, I don't see an enemy. I see a family. I see people who just want to live." The mother's eyes glistened. She lowered her head. "You..." Different for a moment, silence returned. The child stirred in her sleep, coughing weakly, and the mother hushed her with gentle words. Daniel felt something twist inside him. He wanted to do more, to give more, but he knew he had nothing left to offer but his protection. Then the sound of boots crunched outside in the snow. Daniel stiffened, hand flying to his rifle. The mother's eyes widened, her body curling over her daughter in instinctive fear. A patrol. Shadows passed across the shed wall. Voices murmured in the storm. Daniel's heart pounded so loud he thought they might hear it. "Stay quiet," he whispered sharply. The mother held her breath, pressing her daughter tight against her chest. Daniel crouched near the door, gripping his weapon, ready to act. The voices outside drifted closer. A flashlight beam slid across the cracks in the shed wall, spilling thin lines of light across the mother's frightened face. "Tracks lead this way," one soldier said. Daniel's blood turned to ice. The patrol was following their trail. He thought quickly, his mind racing. If they opened this door, it would all be over. The mother and child would be executed on the spot, and he would be branded a traitor. The voices paused just outside. Boots shifted in the snow. Then after a long moment, one of the soldiers cursed. "Storm's covering everything, forget it. Let's head back before we freeze." The footsteps faded. The voices disappeared into the howl of the wind. Daniel exhaled slowly, every muscle in his body trembling. The mother still hadn't moved. Her arms were locked around her daughter, her eyes staring at him as though trying to measure if this was luck or if he had somehow saved them. When the silence returned, Daniel lowered his rifle. His voice was low, urgent. "You can't stay here. It's not safe." "They'll keep searching." The mother nodded weakly. She knew it too, but there was no strength in her body, no safe place to run. Daniel looked at her, at the girl, and then at the darkness beyond the shed door. The weight of truth pressed against him. His commanders had lied. The real monsters were not the people before him. The monsters were the ones who refused to see their humanity. And now Daniel realized his choice was clear. The shed grew colder as the storm raged outside. The air inside was heavy with silence, but Daniel knew it would not last. The patrol had passed by once. They would return. Tracks in the snow would not vanish completely. Sooner or later, someone would notice. The alien mother sat against the wall, her daughter sleeping weakly in her arms. The girl's cough rattled in the quiet space, each sound stabbing at Daniel's nerves. Every cough felt like a signal, a flare calling hunters to their prey. Daniel paced near the door, his boots crunching softly against the frozen floorboards. He knew this was madness. Helping them was not just dangerous, it was suicide. If command learned of this, they would not hesitate. Treason meant death, and yet he could not turn back now. He paused, looking at the mother. Her eyes were half closed, her body trembling, but she stayed awake, holding her child as if letting go would mean losing everything. She met his gaze briefly, then lowered her head, whispering something soft in her own tongue to soothe the girl. Daniel tightened his grip on his rifle. He thought about the patrol's words. "Tracks lead this way." They were close. Too close. A sudden knock against the wind made him jump. A branch scraping the shed roof, or something else. He pressed to the door, listening. For a long moment, only the storm, then faint voices again. "Search this side." His blood froze. They were back. Daniel turned quickly to the mother. "Quiet," he whispered, placing a finger to his lips. She nodded, pressing her hand over her daughter's mouth as the child stirred. The crunch of boots grew louder. Shadows passed again over the cracks in the shed wall. A flashlight beam cut across the dark space, sliding over Daniel's face for a heartbeat before moving on. "Check inside," a soldier said. Daniel's chest tightened. He raised his rifle, his mind racing. If they opened the door, there would be no talking, no reasoning. They would shoot the mother and child instantly, and him too. The door handle rattled. The mother gasped, pulling her daughter tighter. Daniel's finger pressed against the trigger, sweat cold against his skin despite the freezing air. Then another voice spoke, annoyed. "Forget it." Command said sweep the south line. "We're wasting time here." The handle stilled. The boots moved away. Daniel waited, counting each second in his head, his heart pounding. 10. 20, 30. Finally, the sound of footsteps faded into the storm. He exhaled slowly, lowering the rifle. His hands shook as he pressed them against his knees. That had been too close. Far too close. The mother's breathing was ragged. She rocked her daughter gently, her glowing eyes wide with fear. Daniel could see it in her face. She had expected death in that moment. She still wasn't sure they had escaped it. Daniel moved to the wall, sitting heavily against the cold wood. His voice was low, sharp with urgency. They'll keep looking. They won't stop until they find you. The mother's lips trembled. Then, we die. Her words hung in the air like a final truth. Daniel shook his head. Not if I can help it. The mother stared at him, confusion and doubt in her glowing eyes. Why? You risk all. Daniel looked at the sleeping child, at the way she clung even in her dreams to her mother's torn clothing. His throat tightened. Because she deserves a chance to live. Because no one should die begging for food in the snow. The mother's eyes softened, wet with something like hope. She lowered her head in silence, her hand stroking her daughter's hair. But Daniel's mind was racing. He couldn't hide them in the shed forever. He needed a plan. Something bold. Something that would get them away from the base before the patrols closed in for good. A thought burned in his chest. He had a friend inside the base, Corporal Reeves. A man he trusted. A man who still had a heart. If anyone could help, it would be Reeves. But contacting him meant risk. If Reeves betrayed him, it was over. Daniel clenched his fists. He had no choice. He looked at the mother again. I might know someone who can help. But it will be dangerous. The mother nodded weakly. All is dangerous now. Her words were true. Danger was their shadow. Daniel stood, shouldering his rifle. Stay here. Don't move. Don't make a sound. I'll come back. The mother's eyes widened with fear. No, please. Don't leave us. Daniel hesitated at the door, the storm screaming outside. He turned back, his voice firm. I'll be back. I promise. But if I don't try, they'll find you. And then it ends. The mother held his gaze for a long moment. Then she lowered her head, clutching her daughter closer. Daniel pulled his hood up, gripping the rifle tight. He opened the shed door just enough to slip into the storm. The snow swallowed him instantly, the cold biting into his skin. Each step away from the shed felt heavier, as though chains dragged at his boots. He knew the patrols were still out there. He knew one wrong move would mean capture, but he pressed on. Behind him in the dark shed, a mother rocked her sick child and whispered prayers into the night. And in front of him, Daniel walked into danger, not as a soldier of orders, but as a man who had chosen mercy. The storm swallowed Daniel whole. Snow stung his face like knives as he pushed forward, boots sinking into the white drifts. Each step felt heavier than the last, but his mind stayed sharp. He had made his choice, and there was no turning back. Inside the shed, a mother and child waited for him. If he failed, they would die. Daniel clenched his jaw and kept walking until the dark outline of the base rose before him, its towers faint against the storm. The gates glowed with floodlights, and patrols moved like shadows across the walls. It was home, but tonight it felt more like a prison. He slipped through a side path, careful to keep his head low. His heart raced. If anyone stopped him, if anyone searched his coat, they would find the guilt in his eyes before they ever found proof. Finally, he reached the back barracks and slipped inside. The air was warmer, filled with the smell of coffee and damp uniforms. Laughter echoed faintly from another room, but Daniel ignored it. He went straight to a narrow corridor, knocking on a door 3 times in a sharp rhythm. The door opened a crack. A tired face peeked out. Corporal Reeves. Hayes? Reeves frowned. What the hell are you doing out there in this storm? You're supposed to be on watch. Daniel pushed his way inside quickly. Close the door. Reeves shut it, confusion written across his face. What's going on? Daniel didn't waste time. I found survivors. Reeves blinked. Survivors? Aliens, Daniel said, his voice low. A mother and her kid. They're freezing to death out there. I gave them food. I hid them in the old supply shed. Reeves's eyes widened. Are you insane? If anyone hears you, they're not soldiers, Daniel cut him off. They're refugees. Their ship crashed. She told me their world is gone. They're just trying to survive. Reeves shook his head, pacing. Hayes, you know what command says. They're a threat. They're starving, Daniel snapped. The kid's sick. She won't last another night in the cold. Reeves stopped pacing. His jaw tightened, his hands curling into fists. For a long moment, silence filled the small room. Then he let out a slow breath. You're asking me to risk everything, he muttered. I'm asking you to save a child, Daniel said. His voice was steady, sharp with desperation. Reeves, you've got a brother, don't you? Imagine if it was him out there. Imagine if it was your family. Reeves's eyes darkened. He sat on the edge of the bunk, rubbing his hands over his face. When he looked up again, his expression was heavy with conflict. You're crazy, he whispered. But I can't let you do this alone. Relief washed over Daniel like heat in the frozen night. He nodded once. Thank you. Reeves stood, his voice low and quick. We'll need transport. The south fence is weak. The storm knocked out part of the sensor grid. If we can get a truck and slip through, maybe we can get them far enough before anyone notices. Daniel's chest tightened. The plan was dangerous, but it was the only chance. They moved quickly. Reeves pulled out an old map, spreading it across the bunk. He pointed to a narrow valley south of the base. Here, patrols are thin on this side. If we get past the river, the forest will cover you. After that, you're on your own. Daniel nodded, committing every detail to memory. I'll get them ready. Meet me at the motor pool in 30 minutes. Reeves grabbed his coat. If we're caught, we won't be, Daniel said, though he wasn't sure he believed it. They parted ways. Daniel slipped back into the storm, retracing his steps until the faint shape of the shed appeared once more through the snow. He knocked softly before pushing inside. The mother looked up immediately, her glowing eyes sharp with fear. She clutched her daughter tighter, her body tense. It's me, Daniel said quickly, lowering his hood. It's safe. Her shoulders sagged with relief. The child stirred weakly, coughing, her small face pale and tired. Daniel knelt beside them. I have a plan, he said. A friend will help us. We can get you out. The mother studied him for a long moment, as if trying to see into his soul. Finally, she asked, Why trust this friend? Because he's a good man, Daniel said simply. And because he knows what's right. The mother glanced down at her daughter, brushing a strand of hair from her face. Then she looked back at Daniel and nodded. We follow. Daniel pulled a blanket from the corner of the shed and wrapped it tightly around the girl. He lifted her gently into his arms, her small body light as feathers but heavy with responsibility. The mother walked beside him, her bare feet crunching softly in the snow. They moved through the storm, shadows among shadows, until the faint glow of the motor pool lights appeared. Reeves was already there, crouched beside a truck. He waved them over urgently. Get in, he hissed. Daniel climbed into the back, laying the girl carefully across a seat. The mother slid in beside her, holding her hand. Reeves jumped into the driver's seat and started the engine, the sound muffled by the storm. As the truck rolled forward, Daniel felt his chest tighten. Every second brought them closer to freedom, or disaster. The base walls loomed ahead, tall and unforgiving. Beyond them lay the forest. Beyond the forest, a chance at survival, but the searchlight swept across the snow and Daniel knew one mistake could end everything. The truck's engine hummed low as Reeves drove through the storm. Snow lashed against the windshield, the wipers barely keeping up. In the back seat, Daniel sat with the alien child in his arms, her head resting weakly against his chest. The mother sat close beside him, clutching her daughter's hand with trembling fingers. Every bump in the frozen road made Daniel's nerves spike. Beyond the walls of the base lay freedom, but between here and there stood the guards, the fences, and the watchful eyes of men who would kill without hesitation. Reeves gripped the wheel tighter as they neared the south fence. This is it, he muttered. If the storm hasn't buried the sensors, we might make it. If not... He didn't finish. Daniel's eyes flicked to the mother. Her glowing gaze never left her child's face. She was whispering softly in her own language, words Daniel couldn't understand, but he felt their meaning all the same. Prayers, hope, love. The truck slowed. Ahead, the tall fence loomed out of the storm, its steel wires coated in snow and ice. A guard tower rose at the corner, its spotlight sweeping the area like a predator's eye. Daniel's heart pounded. One mistake, one flash of light, and everything would be over. Reeves cut the engine and let the truck roll forward, the storm covering their noise. He steered toward the far corner of the fence where snow had piled high against the broken sensor grid. Hold tight, he whispered. The truck bounced over the drift, tires sliding on ice. The spotlight swept dangerously close, grazing the roof of the truck before sliding away again. Daniel held his breath. The mother squeezed her daughter's hand so tight her knuckles turned white. Then suddenly, shouting, "Truck!" South fence! The spotlight swung back, blinding them. Sirens wailed from the base, sharp and loud, tearing through the storm. "Go," Daniel shouted. Reeves slammed the accelerator. The truck roared forward, crashing through the weak section of the fence. Sparks flew as metal tore, snow exploding around them. Bullets cracked in the night, slamming into the truck's frame. The child whimpered, clutching at Daniel's coat. The mother threw herself over her daughter, shielding her with her own body. "Faster," Daniel yelled. Reeves gritted his teeth, the truck fishtailing as it tore across the frozen field. The forest loomed ahead, dark and thick, their only chance at cover. But the searchlights followed. More sirens blared. Vehicles started behind them. Daniel leaned out the window, rifle in hand. He fired back into the storm, not to kill but to slow their pursuers. Each shot echoed through the night, a desperate plea carved into gunfire. The truck hit the tree line, branches scraping the sides as they barreled into the forest. Reeves swerved hard, weaving between trunks. The snow muffled their tracks, but engines still growled behind them. "They won't stop," Reeves shouted. "They'll hunt us until—" A bullet shattered the rear window, glass spraying across the seats. The mother cried out, pulling her daughter tighter. Daniel's rage burned hot. He fired again, shouting into the storm. "Leave them alone." The forest grew denser, the trucks behind them struggling to follow. Reeves took a sharp turn, sliding the vehicle behind a ridge of rocks. He cut the engine, plunging them into sudden silence. Only the storm remained. For long minutes, the sound of engines roared past in the distance, searchlights flashing weakly through the trees. Then slowly they faded, swallowed by the storm. Silence fell again. Daniel slumped back, breathless. The mother slowly lifted her head, her glowing eyes wide with shock. The child stirred weakly, coughing but alive. Reeves's hand shook on the wheel. "We bought some time, but they'll keep looking." Daniel looked out at the dark forest. Beyond the snow and the danger, there was freedom. Somewhere out there, the mother and child could live. Somewhere out there, maybe, they could build again. He turned back to them. The mother's gaze met his. She bowed her head low, her voice breaking. "You save us, no words." "Enough." Daniel's throat tightened. He looked at the girl, her small hand gripping his sleeve even in her sleep. For a moment he saw not an alien child, but any child. Innocent, fragile, worth saving. He placed a hand gently over hers. "You'll make it," he said softly. "Both of you. Just keep going." The mother's eyes glistened. She reached out and touched his shoulder, a gesture of gratitude that needed no translation. Reeves looked at Daniel, his voice rough. "What about us?" "If they catch us," Daniel shook his head, "then we'll tell them the truth. That not all enemies are monsters. Some just want a warm meal." The words hung heavy in the small space carried by the storm outside. The truck started again, moving deeper into the forest. Behind them, the base was just a glow in the distance, its sirens fading into the night. Ahead, the snow-covered world stretched wide and uncertain. But for the first time, Daniel felt a strange spark in his chest. Not just fear, not just duty, hope. As the mother held her daughter close, whispering softly into the storm, Daniel looked out into the dark and whispered to himself, "Maybe one day, we can share a meal, not a war." The storm swallowed the words, carrying them into the night. But the choice had been made.